to talk about. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to be talking about Financial Aid 101 today. My name is Carrie Harlow and I work in VSAC's Resource Center and also as a financial aid specialist at VSAC. I'm joined today by Stacy King, who is part of our Education Opportunity Center program. She is one of their outstanding counselors and joining us from her perspective. We are also joined, you heard the voice earlier of Christopher Berry. He is our Operations and Special Projects Manager, and he is our wonderful and capable MC today. So let's get started with what we're going to be talking about.
Carrie, could I jump in real quick and just mention that the chat is disabled and any questions should be put into the Q&A. So feel free to throw questions in there and Chris will be monitoring that and we will answer them as they come in.
Perfect. Thanks for the reminder, Stacy. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about our session goals today. We're going to cover applications and programs. Many of them will be federal aid related as well as state grant and scholarship related. We want to make sure to get you all the information that you need, but we do understand that there will be questions. Please put those in the Q&A as Stacy mentioned. And we're really looking forward to sharing a lot of information with you today. Please note that this is being recorded and also we will have resources available on our Education Professionals page. Stacy, go ahead.
Okay, so this is a little bit like learning a new language. There's a lot of new terminology and a lot of different forms that are involved in applying for financial aid. So some of the applications we're going to talk about today include the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, the Vermont grant applications, and there's multiple different Vermont grants that we'll talk about. There are also institutional aid applications, which we will not spend time discussing today, but we do recommend that students are aware and that counselors are aware that different schools may require their own applications and some schools may require the CSS profile. There is also an application specific to the VSAC assisted scholarships called the VSAC Unified Scholarship Application. There are lots of other scholarship applications out there in the world. And finally, and hopefully last resource, would be loan applications that are required to be completed for students to access both their federal student loans and any private student loans if they need them. All right, so there are a limited amount of resources that are available to students for accessing education prior to their high school credential. Yes, high school credentials, so high school diploma or GED. In Vermont, we are really lucky to have a dual enrollment process. Oh, you can go ahead and move. Thank you, Chris. The dual enrollment stipend is for students that are taking a dual enrollment class. And a reminder that in Vermont, students have access to 2 vouchers to take coursework at the college level with tuition covered. If the students have additional expenses in those courses, such as travel or books, they can be eligible for a stipend to help offset those costs if they are eligible for free and reduced lunch. They do have to have shown that financial eligibility by having applied for free and reduced lunch or having other qualifying needs-based. Sorry, Carrie, what is the term I'm looking for there?
So that they're showing they're eligible for free or reduced lunch or by being eligible for other need-based programs.
Needs-based programs,
state,
thank
like
you.
3 squares.
Yes, like 3 squares or Medicaid, Dr. Dinosaur eligibility. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I feel like it's a Monday morning. The way that this happens, how they get the dual enrollment stipend, when they apply for their dual enrollment voucher, the student says, yes, I have additional expenses for this class, and whether or not they're eligible for free or reduced lunch. And then the coordinator at the school, when they are completing the verification, checks off that they do have additional expenses and that they're eligible for free and reduced lunch. When the Agency of Education receives that information from the school, they send a list of those students to VSAC, and VSAC then directly mails a check for $150 to the student at the beginning of the term to reimburse them and or help out with those costs. So that is how a student can be eligible for the dual enrollment stipend. All right. And then in addition, in Vermont, we also have an outstanding program called Early College, where students who are seniors in high school can take a year of college classwork, coursework to count as their senior requirements, as well as completing a year of college at the same time. Students are not eligible for any federal aid while they're still enrolled in high school because eligibility for federal aid requires a high school credential. However, the state of Vermont recognized that these students will have some costs. So they allowed the students in early college to have access to a basic Vermont grant if they were eligible based on financial need. So the maximum amount, or really the only amount, is $500 a semester if the student is determined to have need. And that amount is paid to the college each semester after the student's enrollment is verified. The college applies that grant towards the student bill if there is one, and then refunds any remainder to the student. The student would also get that dual enrollment stipend if they were eligible for the early college grant, and it's only one stipend regardless of the fact that they are taking multiple classes that term. So still only the $150. They file the same applications as if they had a high school credential. So they will complete a FAFSA, which we will talk about in a little bit, and they will list their early college institution as the school they're going to be attending. And they complete a Vermont grant application, and there is a specific question on there that asks, are you enrolled in early college? And they will answer yes. And that is how the student then can be eligible for this early college stipend to help out with their expenses, such as the books, the transportation, internet costs, etc., for their full-time year of early college, if they are determined to have financial need.
And Chris, do we have any questions about dual enrollment or early college funding?
We have not received any questions as of yet.
Perfect. I'm going to move into talking a little bit about the FAFSA. FAFSA is short for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It is the main financial aid form for most colleges and universities, as well as some trade schools that are eligible for something called Title IV aid. Colleges that are eligible for Title IV aid, basically, it means that those colleges are eligible for federal financial aid and as well as for the Vermont grant. So why do you complete the FAFSA? Well, it's required for any federal student aid programs, including loans. It is also required for students to be considered for the Vermont degree grant, the Vermont part-time grant, as well as the 802 Opportunity Program. And it could also be required for institutional financial aid, where the student is applying for admission, as well as for potential scholarships that may also require showing financial need. So how do people apply? Well, we really recommend that people apply electronically. Filing, there is a paper PDF, but that is, gosh, like I think last year's or the current years that we're in right now, the 25-26 school year, is 22 pages long if you were to print off the PDF. It requires extra postage to mail in. Someone has to scan it and upload it to the FAFSA. Really, you want to encourage people to apply electronically. And what we know is that more than 99% of all FAFSA applicants are filing online. And so who's eligible for federal student aid? This information is right from studentaid.gov, so you could find this right on their website, but students have to demonstrate financial need for most of the programs. They need to be a US citizen or what's called an eligible non-citizen. This includes a US permanent resident who has a permanent resident card, or an individual who has an arrival departure record from USCIS, US Citizenship and Immigration Services, that shows one of the following designations: refugee, asylum granted, Cuban Haitian entrant, conditional entrant, victims of human trafficking, parolee, and for parolee, you need to be paroled into the US for at least a year. And you need to show that you're in the US for other than a temporary purpose and you intend to be a US citizen. A student has to have a valid social security number, with the exception of students from the Republic of the Marshall Islands, federal states of Micronesia, and the Republic of Palau. They do not have social security numbers. And a student needs to be enrolled or accepted for enrollment as a regular student in an eligible degree or certificate program. The student also has to be enrolled at least half-time to be eligible for federal student loan funds. They have to maintain satisfactory academic progress at their school in order to continue to receive financial aid. And they have to sign a certification statement on the FAFSA. Basically, they click a box that states they're not in default of a federal student loan. They don't owe money on a federal student grant that had to be refunded, and that they'll only use the federal student aid for educational purposes. They also have to show that they're qualified to obtain a college or career school education, basically meaning that they've completed some sort of high school credential in order to be able to qualify. And I'm going to hand off to Stacy to talk about whose information's on the FAFSA.
Excellent. And this is often one of the first and hardest questions to answer, is whose information gets put in this FAFSA form. And the first question to ask is whether the student is dependent or independent. So will they need parental information on the form? And this is a question I help students answer almost every day. So you have to be able to answer these questions yes, in order to be independent. So for this upcoming school year, 26-27, were you born before January 1st of 2003? As in, will you be 24? As of today, are you married? Will you be working on a master's degree or a doctorate program? Are you currently on active duty for purposes other than training? Are you a veteran of the armed forces? Do you now have children who will receive more than half of their support from you between July 1st and June 30th, which is the school year, academic school year? We can go to the next one. Do you have dependents other than your children or spouse who live with you and who receive more than half of their support from you through the academic year, financial aid year? At any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? Determined by the court in your state of legal residence, are you or were you an emancipated minor? As in, did you divorce your parents? And does someone other than your parent or step-parent have legal guardianship of you as determined by a court in your state of legal residence? So these questions are all questions that are determining, have you separated in some way from your parents? And these are the criteria that are required to have been met to say that that is the case. And for many families, that's a very challenging situation. There's another situation that can make students independent, and that is being an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or self-supporting and at risk of being homeless. And this is unaccompanied. So it's not a family who is together and homeless, but a youth who is under 24 and on their own. This has to be verified or documented by a high school or district homeless liaison through the director of an emergency shelter or transitional housing program, through a director of a runaway or homeless youth basic center or transitional living program, or through the director or designee of a federal TRIO program or Gear Up grant. And as many of you are aware, VSAC holds the TRIO programs and Gear Up grants. So a VSAC counselor can work with a student to determine if they meet this criteria.
And
Okay.
Stacey, I just want to jump in and mention that in addition to that, college financial aid offices can also make that homeless designation if a student cannot, they can't have access to the resources that we've just listed for some reason.
Yes, the student can have an interview with the financial aid administrator of the college, and the college can determine whether they meet this criteria. All right, if the student says no to all of those previous questions, they are considered dependent for federal student aid. It does not matter if they've lived on their own for a while. It does not matter if the parents do not claim them on taxes. Those are not questions that are asked to determine dependency. So it's only the ones that were on the FAFSA. So if they said no, they have to use parent information when they apply. If they're considered dependent and those parents refuse to contribute their information, there is a question on the FAFSA that says my parents will not provide information, and those students can be allowed to use an unsubsidized federal student loan only. There is also an option for a dependency override. The student, again, interviews with the financial aid administrator at the college, and they will receive a provision. They complete their FAFSA, they receive a provisional student aid index, and then they have to go to the college, send documentation, and determine, the college will determine if they meet their criteria to override the dependency. And this is usually a relatively high bar for colleges to say, yes, you are independent and we don't need parent information. Okay. All right. Whew. Do we have any questions, Chris, before I move on to the next session of once we know who needs to be on the FAFSA, how to make an account?
Not on this topic at this time. Okay.
All right. So once you determine whether the student is dependent or independent, and we know if we need parent information or not, those people are going to need an FSA ID, also known as your FSA account or federal student aid account or studentaid.gov account. You can call it all kinds of things. And you're going to use this FSA ID to access FAFSA on the web, to access federal student loan entrance counseling and the master promissory note if students want to take their federal student loans, as well as the TEACH grant agreement to serve if a student is accessing that program. The students themselves, their parents if they are independent, the spouses, either of the student or of the parents, and borrowers would create an FSA ID. Each person. They each need a unique username and password. So they're going to do create account, and then they have to link a unique email address to that account. Do not use the school email address because that school email address may become inaccessible after high school graduation. So use another email address that you will continue to have access to. You choose 4 challenge questions, you create your own answers to them, and you set up 2-step verification using email, cell phone, or an authentication app. And up to you, whatever you find the most useful for multi-factor. Some tips on setting up your username and passwords. You might want some additions to your usernames. You could try adding a middle name or initial into your username. You could try adding a year, but it will not allow you to use your date of birth. So, maybe your graduation year, 2026, or your college graduation year, your goal. You could try putting in your house number or the digits of your phone number. There is a YouTube video available that can give you tips on creating your usernames. Each FSA ID is unique to one person. It is tied to the Social Security number when you create it. So this is your identification. It becomes your signature for this federal student aid account. Parents, students, and spouses can't share an FSA ID, and they can't use the same email address for different IDs. So if a parent has an FSA ID from a previous child attending, or if they went to their own education, that parent is going to use that same FSA ID. And if they forgot it, they're just going to use the forgot username prompt or the forgot password prompt. If they attempt to create another one, it will tell them that it knows that Social Security number, and you go through that process of retrieving it. If a parent or spouse contributor does not have a Social Security number, they can still create an FSA ID. And the student and the parents have to create the FSA ID before you can start the FAFSA or accept an invitation to contribute to the FAFSA, though you can do it at the time, like right as you're going to do it, which is very good. Woo. All right. And is it still me, Carrie?
If you'd like me to pick up, I can.
Yeah, I'll pass it off.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about FAFSA terms, right? You've heard Stacy use the term contributor. FAFSA, Federal Student Aid, is using the term contributor to describe whose information is required to be on the FAFSA. It does not mean who's required to pay or how much people are required to pay. It is just the way to say we're contributing information. This is the person who has to contribute information for federal financial aid. In addition, the word consent is now used, and that basically means that contributors on the FAFSA have to give consent and approve the process for federal income tax information to come directly from the IRS for the student to be considered for federal student aid. So if it's a dependent student, it's the student and the parent who must give consent. If it is an independent student, it is the student and possibly the spouse who has to give consent for that information. Even if they don't file, they still have to give consent. And without that consent, the student will not be eligible for federal financial aid. And it actually says that on the very screen where they ask for the student or parent or spouse consent. So let's talk a little bit about who's a contributor. With dependent students, there's a lot of questions about which parent or contributor information is required. And I, when I worked in high schools, got that question all the time. So let's try to break it down simply. If the biological or adoptive parents live together, regardless of their marital status, both parents' information needs to be on the FAFSA. If the parents don't live together, it is the parent who provided more support in the previous year whose information needs to be on the FAFSA. Now, I get a lot of questions as well about, we have a 50-50 arrangement. The student is exactly 50% of the time in each home. We cover 50% of each expenses. Then you want to consider things like maybe who is paying for the student to be on their health insurance, or maybe who is the person who supplies the student with a car to use. Those sorts of things might have to be taken into consideration. If neither parent provided more support, then FAFSA is pretty clear. It's the parent who has more income and assets whose information will be on the form. So much better to figure out who goes over and does that 50.1% versus 49.9%. If that parent is married, it is the parent and step parent whose information needs to be on the FAFSA. The FAFSA has this really cool FAFSA Parent Wizard tool on their website, and you can put in the parents' names and figure out with a series of very simple questions whose information needs to be on. And I just want to mention, since you can see that that's highlighted a little bit and underlined, this presentation the slides will be available after this presentation, probably early next week on our education resources page. We'll give you a link to that if you registered for this workshop, and you will be able to click on those links. They're live. You can go to those places on the FAFSA website so you can see how that works. For independent students, if the student is married, it is the student and spouse, even if the marriage is recent and they were not married when the taxes were filed. And if it's a single independent student, it is just that student's information who will be on. So starting the FAFSA is really a roles-based process. Each contributor will enter the FAFSA separately. They use their own FSA ID. And then when they get on, they're going to be asked, are you the parent or are you the student in this case? So if the student begins the FAFSA first, they're going to need to invite the other parent contributor. And if the parent is going to start and then invite the student, they have to give all the students identifying information in order for that other person to be invited. Now, the FAFSA uses something called prior year income. So for instance, depending on the year, the school year that the student wants financial aid, we are then talking about the prior year's taxes. So for students who want to begin college in the fall of 2026, they're going to be using prior year income, which is 2024, which when you think about it, that was the last year we filed our taxes that are available, right? They can submit the FAFSA between October 1st and June 30th of 2027. So their deadline for federal student aid is really before the end of the school year that you were enrolled. Of course, we want to do that earlier, but just talking about that prior income. So that's why for the 26-27 FAFSA, we are asking about 2024 income information. From that information, financial need is determined on the FAFSA, and they use this thing called an SAI, or Student Aid Index. And so how is that determined? The Student Aid Index, it's basically a starting point for colleges to determine financial aid eligibility. It's not what the student and family has to pay. It's not what they're expected to pay. It is really the college's starting point. And so they are looking at that income from the student as well as from parent contributors for a dependent student or the spouse. If the student is married, they're looking at that prior year income that we just talked about. For maximum Pell Grant, they're comparing that against a percentage of federal poverty guidelines in order to get that maximum Pell. There is also a separate calculation for minimum Pell. So a family could, based on their income and family size and that percentage of federal poverty level, could be eligible for a maximum or minimum Pell Grant. But for anyone not eligible for the maximum, they will go through that SAI calculation and even the minimum Pell. The thinking is if you're eligible for minimum Pell, but maybe you're eligible for more than minimum Pell, that SAI will be able to inform that. They are looking at family size, as I mentioned, but they're also looking at parent and student assets. Although for some FAFSA filers, there's a skip logic. And if you meet certain criteria, assets aren't required to be reported. And sometimes families have gotten in touch with me and said, wait a minute, I wasn't asked about assets at all. What's this all about? And it's usually because they somehow qualified. For instance, if a student was eligible for a maximum Pell Grant, there is no question about assets. You can estimate or recommend that families estimate their federal aid eligibility. Again, federal student aid has a lot of resources, and one of them is this Federal Student Aid Estimator website, which could give an SAI as well as potential Pell or maybe potential student loan eligibility. And they can do that from the Federal Student Aid website. Can we talk for a minute about FAFSA frequent errors? So this is where people tend to get tripped up. Parent and student social security numbers. That is often a challenge. If you enter one digit wrong, it's not going to match up and it's going to bring everything to a halt. And so that's really important to use the right one. I have been at forms nights where a parent has used not the student's, but a sibling's social security number, and had to go back and change that. They also ask for the parent and student date of birth, and that is sometimes a question that people get tripped up on. Some people fill out the wrong year application. So when the 2025-2026 application became available, the previous year application was still running. This year, when 26-27 becomes available, 2026-2027 becomes available. 2025-2026 will still be showing because the FAFSA opens in October, and there may be people applying for financial aid for the upcoming January, and that's a different year. So you want to make sure that you choose the year that the student will be in college and needs the money. Sometimes a FAFSA frequent error is that whole divorced, remarried, or unmarried but living together parent information and whose information is required. There's sometimes some confusion about legal guardianship, which is a legal status for someone other than a parent, and confusing that with custody. That is very different. There's a question on the FAFSA about IRA and pension rollover, and the question is specifically, of the amount on this line on the taxes, how much of this was a rollover? And parents sometimes think, well, all of it was, but they don't have a number. That's why you might need to have taxes handy when filing the FAFSA. Household size is another frequent error, like who do you consider in the household? Real estate or investment net worth, that's an asset that's reported on the FAFSA, but some people include assets that aren't supposed to be imported, that aren't supposed to be reported, like the family home. The family primary home is not reported on the FAFSA. People also sometimes report the value only rather than the net worth, which is the value minus the debt. Sometimes people are answering questions about not wanting aid other than a subsidized loan. The FAFSA has something built in where automatically it says, I want all federal aid. You have to change it to say, I only want an unsubsidized loan. I don't want any other aid. So hopefully that has taken down that error that still happens. There's a free lunch question on the FAFSA. And just like we talked about with dual enrollment and reporting about eligibility for free lunch, this is reporting eligibility for free lunch, not when everyone in your school or everyone in your state gets free lunch. This is, are you eligible based on family financial circumstances? Some people forget to sign the FAFSA. They get to the information page, and rather than continuing and going to sign it, they think they're done and they stop. Also, not submitting the FAFSA after signing is a common error. So these are things we watch out for to make sure that families are successful in filing. Then also there's the FAFSA confirmation. Once a student hits submit, once the parent whose information they're waiting for hits submit, once the spouse hits submit, it is the person who's the last person who needs to submit the FAFSA. Once that happens, there will be a FAFSA confirmation page listing things such as the SAI and Pell and direct loan eligibility, colleges that are listed on the FAFSA, and there will also be a link to file the state grant application. Additional acknowledgments will probably follow to the student with an email to the applicant that includes a reference to the student FAFSA financial summary. Students can log in at any time via the FAFSA on the web address to check their application status. The FAFSA is a just the facts document. And so sometimes students or families will have special or unusual circumstances. Special circumstances are things like a change in the parent or the student's employment status, for an example. High medical dental bills that were paid and not covered by insurance, or high insurance costs or deductibles that are met. There may be a change in the parent's marital status. So the parents had a married return and now a parent has separated. That is a special circumstance. There may be unusual dependent care expenses. Sometimes there's a natural disaster. We have had flooding situations here in Vermont, and any expenses not reimbursed by insurance or FEMA could be something that the family talks about as a special circumstance. Unusual circumstances are really those situations where a student is unable to get parents' information due to a parent being incarcerated, an abusive situation that the student may have fled, or maybe there's no relationship at all and they can't qualify under the other questions that Stacy talked about earlier. By the way, parents refusing to provide information is not considered an unusual circumstance for that student. Again, if the parents are refusing to submit information, that is not a situation where the student is eligible to be independent. So there's an action step. The student or parent should send written information to each of the colleges or trade schools or to their financial aid offices, not admissions, but financial aid, as well as to the Vermont Grant Program at VSAC. Parent correspondence sent to the federal student aid processor will be disposed of. So do not send anything to FAFSA. They're not doing anything other than processing information. It needs to go to the college's financial aid offices. Chris, do we have questions? I just covered a whole bunch of information.
None at this time.
Okay. I'm going to move on to FAFSA verification. This is a process by which the U.S. Department of Education confirms through the College Financial Aid Office that the information provided by students and their families on the FAFSA is accurate. So students can be selected for verification by the Department of Education or by the college, and the items to be verified may vary, and there may be an additional form that the student or the parent needs to fill out. And federal aid will not be disbursed until that verification is complete. So a student could have gotten a financial aid notification and known that they were receiving certain financial aid, but that financial aid will not get disbursed if the student was chosen for verification and they have not done the things that they need to do. So it's very important that if a student is chosen, that they take care of that. I want to talk this year about available federal financial aid and some maximum amounts for the major programs. That is for the current school year because it is oftentimes very late before we hear about, for instance, what 26-27 maximums will be. This requires Congress action. So this year, the federal Pell Grant is $7,395 as a maximum. It is prorated for students who are less than full-time status. Federal work study depends on the funds available at the school. Then there's direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans. The maximum is $5,500 total for a dependent student, and the student can be eligible for a maximum of $3,500 of subsidized loan. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And independent students, so people who could answer yes to any one of the questions we covered earlier, are eligible for $9,500 total, again, a maximum of $3,500 subsidized loan. And then there are direct loans for parents. So this year, the 2025-2026 school year, the maximum a parent could borrow is the cost of attendance at the college minus the financial aid offered. That is going to change, and I'd like to recommend you see us in the updates for that information. And funds from other programs are available. You can look up information about federal grant programs and federal student loan programs for details. So how carefully were you listening? We're going to put up a poll and see if you are able to answer our test question. And Chris, I cannot see this. So once you feel like enough people have answered.
Sounds good. Their answers are rolling in now.
Okay, great.
Give it just a few more seconds. We've got 66% participation, which is amazing.
Great. And so the question is, I'm a dependent student. My parents are divorced. I live with parent one and I see parent two every other weekend, and this structure will not change. Who is my parent contributor? All right. And let's show the correct answer. Can you see that?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So the correct answer is, Stacy, do you want to answer that?
We need more information. And the reason we need more information is because we don't know the details about finances here. So we don't know if they're 50-50 contributing to this student. We do not know if the every other weekend parent is actually paying significant child support or significant alimony or patrimony to the other parent. So we don't know who is financially responsible for this dependent student. So we need more information.
And I believe the parents who are, I believe the people who are attending who answered parent one probably thought that living with the parent is a significant amount of financial support. And certainly that's probably true. But
Yes.
we would want to ask that additional question about who's providing more support.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
And generally, if both parents are working and doing 50-50 support and one is providing housing, yes, that person providing housing likely is providing more support.
So do we have any additional questions, Chris? I know people's brains are probably about to explode. That was a lot of FAFSA information.
We don't have any on-topic questions at this time.
Okay, perfect. All right, Stacy, I'd love to hand off to you to talk much more about Vermont grants.
Okay, so we just did a lot about the federal information, so let's bring it home a little bit and talk about Vermont grants. So we have multiple grants that are administered by VSAC for the state of Vermont. We have a full-time Vermont grant, including the early college stipend we talked about earlier, and a part-time Vermont grant as well. There's also the 802 Opportunity Grant. There's a Vermont Advancement Grant, which we will talk about a little bit later. We're not going to do it in this section, but I will talk about it more for using at non-degree or non-Title IV institutions. And we have micro grants. So this pool of grants we refer to as Vermont grants, but then we get a little bit complicated because we specifically talk about the grant that goes along with the FAFSA as the Vermont grant. So we're going to start with that one. All of these grants, no matter which, begin with My VSAC. And this is the online portal for students to access all support through VSAC. The account is for the student. So they're going to use the same My VSAC account when they apply for their Vermont grants, when they do the VSAC assisted scholarships every year they are enrolling. You also can use it for accessing VSAC private loans should they decide that that is necessary. Contact information in the My VSAC portal needs to be updated. I would say set a reminder each year to make sure that that is updated, both email and postal addresses, in order to have efficient communication. It's a multi-step process to set up a My VSAC. The student creates the account with a non-school email. That link to set it up is emailed to the student to confirm that that email address is working, and that link is used to create the password and set up a challenge question. Then the student is in and they set up multi-factor authentication using either a cell phone number or an authentication app called Okta. Students who lose or forget their My VSAC login need to follow the prompts to be reminded of what their username is or what their password is and not create a new account. That gets complicated. So the Vermont grant, when we refer to that specifically, is the grant that goes along with the FAFSA. The information needed for the Vermont grant much of it will come along from the FAFSA. So students that are designating that they are Vermonters, that they reside in Vermont, will have information automatically come through to VSAC when the FAFSA processes. That income information is from the prior year, will come through, and the asset information that was reported on the FAFSA would also come through. The one piece of information that Vermont requests that is not on the FAFSA is the primary home value and debt. This question sometimes people struggle with, and the way we explain it is, if you sold the home in the next couple of weeks, what would it be worth? And what would you have to pay back to the bank in order to clear it? Those are the two questions. So what is it worth, market value, and what do you owe against it? Those are the questions. That's really only additional information in terms of financial information that's on the Vermont grant application. The rest is about, just demographics and school. Are you going to be part-time? That kind of information. The Vermont grant is portable, meaning that if a student is eligible for the Vermont grant, this can be used for study out of state. So it travels with the student to the institution that they deem as where they want to go. The top 3 colleges listed on the FAFSA move into the Vermont grant application. If a student is going to be attending elsewhere, it's important to put a reminder in their phone to update the school on their Vermont grant, just to make sure it matches up. How do you know if you are going to be eligible for a Vermont grant? 1, you need to be a Vermont resident. You also need to be enrolling in a program that is going to lead to a degree, a diploma, or a certificate. So again, it needs to match up with a program that would use the FAFSA. You have to have financial need that is determined by the VSAC grant program according to the calculations. It is not the same calculations used for FAFSA. So if you were not eligible for grant for a Pell Grant for federal purposes, that does not mean you will not be eligible for a state grant. It's a different calculation. You have to maintain satisfactory academic progress, and you have to attend an eligible institution. And next slide. You also have a limit on the number of terms you can use a Vermont grant. So you have to not have received the equivalent of 10 full-time semesters, with the exception of if you enroll in the Doctor of Medicine program at UVM College of Medicine or any accredited Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program, and not have a bachelor's degree, again, unless you are enrolled in the Doctor of Medicine program at UVM or any accredited Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program. You also need to not owe a refund on any federal or state grant or scholarship program. So typically, you can have 10 full-time semester equivalents of Vermont grant, unless you go on to medical school or veterinary school, medical school at UVM or veterinary school anywhere. All right, excellent.
Great. And so the way that you can access applying for the Vermont grant is there is a link right from the student's confirmation page when they submit their FAFSA. And I just wanted to give you a look at what that looks like. The upper part of the page says, congratulations, you've submitted. There is that information about aid eligibility or estimated aid eligibility and SAI. And then as you scroll down the page, there is that link to start your application for Vermont state-based aid. Now, if you're not able to link from the FAFSA, that's fine. You can find the My VSAC link right on the VSAC homepage. And so the Vermont grant application, it has to be filed, and all the requested documentation has to be submitted for a student to be eligible for a Vermont grant. So the student has to apply regardless of whether a college or university estimates a Vermont grant on their financial aid notification. A student still has to go through the process of applying for a Vermont grant. The Vermont grant application is also used for consideration for 802 opportunity. You do not need to fill out an extra one. The application will be available in October 2025 for the 26-27 school year, and students will be applying by going to vsac.org by clicking on the My VSAC button, or they can create their application or create their My VSAC account before they begin the application by clicking on the My VSAC button. Regardless of whether you link from the FAFSA or when you go on our webpage, you get brought to this page, which is the My VSAC login. So you can log into My VSAC if the student already has an account created, or if they're new, they can register now. Once they create that account, they're going to see a dashboard, and on that dashboard, they will choose Work with Grants in order to apply for the Vermont grant. And then they'll get a question. So for instance, students in October will see a question that says, does your program start before July 1st, 2026? And so the student will say no. And when they say no, it'll take them to the right year's application. And you can see here which grant do you want to apply for, because the student answered that it would be starting after July 1st, then it's the 26-27 Vermont grant application. If they wanted to apply for 2025-2026, they would answer that yes, no question differently, and it would bring them to a different page. So there's communication that takes place from VSAC if more information is needed. So requests for information a lot of times relies on electronic communication. For example, email will happen first when the student needs to submit more information like a tax return or fill out a form. A paper letter will be mailed if the student doesn't log in within 20 days of the initial request. And so the email goes to the student and says, we need some more information for your Vermont grant. Please click here and log in to see what's needed. And they can look at the to-do list to see what they have. We have a lot of forms that can be completed online, right from the student's to-do list on My VSAC, and tax returns can be uploaded. When a student files a FAFSA with CCV listed as the institution to get the FAFSA information and they have a Vermont grant application, the student will automatically be considered for the 802 Opportunity Program. So that income information comes directly from the FAFSA. And again, when the student says their state is Vermont, that information will come right to VSAC. So the income criteria for dependent students is if the parent income is less than $100,000 on those 2024 taxes for the 26-27 school year, or for independent students that the student and spouse, if applicable, that their joint income is less than $100,000. Between Pell, the Vermont grant, and 802 Opportunity, CCV tuition will be covered, and the $100 administrative fee will be covered. As mentioned earlier, there's no additional application required when students have applied for the Vermont grant. So the Vermont grant for CCV students also has them applying for the 802 Opportunity Program. Let's talk for a minute about the micro grant. What we discovered at VSAC is that small unexpected expenses that a college student encounters could potentially create a situation that ends their enrollment. So you think about a commuting student and they hit something on the interstate, like they hit a nail or something like that, and their tire is suddenly destroyed. And now they need a new tire, but they don't have the money for a new tire. And if they're commuting, they have to get to school. So how will they take care of that? So it's situations like this where the micro grant might be available. The range is from $50 to $400. It's a one-time grant. The student has to be a Vermont resident. They have to be enrolled or planning to enroll in a degree program. So, for instance, if this happened in late August and the student is beginning in September, they have to be eligible for a Vermont grant for that current school year, and they are nominated by the College Financial Aid Office or by TRIO or Gear Up program staff, or sometimes, recently a parent called VSAC and let us know about a student situation where they could potentially need a micro grant. So let's talk about examples of those expenses. I mentioned one, but for instance, laptop or Chromebook repair or replacement, food insecurity, a car repair. I mentioned that with a commuting student who needs to get to school. Generally, the micro grant is for unexpected expenses, It's not for things like billable or non-billable regular college expenses, like a shortage in their bill or books. The exception to books would be if a student's book bag was stolen and they needed to replace their already purchased books and supplies. So they might need the micro grant for that. We also want to mention that we mentioned a car repair. It's not for regular car maintenance or their tire changeover each year. It's really having to do with those unexpected expenses. So this would be a good place to pause for questions, but also to ask another poll question, right?
Yes, I just launched poll number 2.
Great. And I can see this one. So true or false, the Vermont grant can only be used in the state of Vermont. And Stacy, would you like to give the answer for that?
Sure. Do we think we've got 76%?
Let's go for it.
Wow. I'm going to try this again. Sure. We have 76% participation, and the correct answer is false. The Vermont grant is portable. It can go with the student to their program, whether in state or beyond.
We have had a couple of questions that I think would be really a good time to address them now pretty quickly. First one is,
Great.
you talked about 802 opportunity. Can you advise, can early college students take advantage of 802 opportunity?
I can. And no, because early college students already have free tuition. That is the what early college program is free tuition at their college program. The tuition is paid for through a program through the Agency of Education. So they do not need 802 opportunity if they were choosing to do early college at CCV because they have no tuition costs.
Thank you.
And additionally, Stacy, high school students are only eligible for the early college grant if they show financial need, as opposed to the traditional programs. I should also mention that 802 opportunity is not available for people who already hold a bachelor's degree.
All right. You spoke, Carrie, briefly about a MyVSAC account. Should students create a MyVSAC account before they think about filling out the FAFSA?
What I would say is if a student is, for instance, setting up their studentaid.gov account, their FSA ID, they could set up their MyVSAC account at the same time. There's nothing that says that the student has to do so far in advance. I think if a family is going to a forms night at their high school, sometimes it's really helpful and saves a lot of time if the student creates their accounts before they head into that forms night.
Last but not least for now, you pointed out the really cool button on the FAFSA submission summary where it says start application for state-based aid. If a student has already started their VSAC grant, maybe they finished it or not, should they still click on that start application for state-based aid button?
If they haven't finished it, they absolutely could click on that and drop into their Vermont grant and finish it up. If they've already completed it, there's no need to do that.
That was our last question.
Yep. Many years ago, when you clicked the button from the FAFSA to the Vermont grant application, there was some information that came over from the FAFSA immediately. Due to privacy concerns and changes, they've really buttoned up things at federal student aid. No information now comes via linking from the FAFSA to the Vermont grant application. So there's no real advantage or disadvantage to doing it one way or another. You can choose whichever way you wish. So, Stacy, let's see. Would you like to talk about short-term training?
Sure. So earlier when we talked about Vermont grants, I said one of the grants we have is the advancement grant. And this grant is meant for training that is not necessarily for college degree work. So the advancement grant is available now if your program is starting before June 30th of 2026. So that's the 25-26 academic year. And then we would anticipate that the next academic year for programs that start after July would come out in May. So this form does come out a bit later than the others. To be eligible to use the advancement grant, the student has to be out of high school. So the program has to happen after the high school credential is obtained. Bachelor's degree holders can use the advancement grant. And this is meant for non-degree coursework or for short-term training programs, or to take up to 2 college classes per term. Sorry about that. I don't know if you heard my phone go off. That can prepare the student for further coursework or entrance to a degree program or increase their employability. So you can use the advancement grant to take a couple of college classes. Some students use the advancement grant. When we talked about FAFSA and Vermont grant, we talked about maintaining satisfactory academic progress. Occasionally students have a tough semester and they lose their academic eligibility for federal aid. If that happens, there is the advancement grant option to take up to 2 college classes using this to build up their GPA or completion rate to help regain federal aid eligibility. So that is something to think about for students that are doing the college pathway. But this is also for all of the things that are not college related. We have many, many very interesting training programs in Vermont and in our region that the advancement grant can be used for, from cosmetology to CDL to equine dentistry and beyond. The limit for 25-26 is $7,500. With the exception of driver's education, that limit is $1,000. For all grants, all of the Vermont grants, you can only use 2 terms of any of the state grants in an academic year, whether that is 2 advancement grants, 2 Vermont grants, or 1 of each. Individuals can be awarded up to 6 advancement grants in their lifetime. And as we said earlier, up to 10 full-time equivalent semesters of Vermont grant, and you can use both of them. So these advancement grants are also accessed exactly the way you would apply for anything else through VSAC, using that My VSAC portal. You would choose Work with Grants, and then you would answer the question of, does your program start before July 1st? If it's a no, right now, you would not see the option for advancement grant. You're not going to see 26-27 advancement grant until about May. And then when it is available, you would choose that one. The FAFSA is not required to determine advancement grant eligibility. And because of that, you will need financial information in a different way. If the student is a dependent, parents are going to need to complete a different form in order to provide the income and asset information that would normally have come through to VSAC, like through a FAFSA if you were going in a different method. So there's a worksheet that the parents complete, and then the tax returns are provided to determine income eligibility if the taxes were filed in that prior year. Those can be uploaded through the My VSAC portal, which is best practice, or they can be mailed in. And I'm just going to throw this out there because we see it too frequently. Never email your tax returns to anyone anytime. Email is not a secure method of communication. So in 26, 27, remember 2024 is the prior year. So that's the year of taxes that would be requested. And so the student submits their tax returns if they are independent, and the parent would submit tax returns if the student is dependent. Ooh. So again, here you can see the screen that you would see after that work with grants button and the question of what does it start before July? And you would see here, would be what you would see if you were to look at it now and say it started before July of 2025, yes. And you would choose the advancement grant application, and it would have you answer questions about your program. One unique component of this application is that you do need to know, if you are taking coursework, what the name of the courses are. So on the FAFSA, you don't need to know what you're going to be taking for classes, right? You don't even need to know necessarily which school you're going to be going to. On the advancement grant, you do need to know what classes are you taking, how much do they cost, when do they start, and what school are you going to. Here you can see the award screen. So in this particular scenario, a student has applied to do the Champlain Teacher apprenticeship program. Thank you. Appreciate what the A stood for. And this is a post-bachelor's apprenticeship program where a student can become a teacher through Champlain College's program. And they were awarded their non-degree $7,500 to do that program. Okay. Let's see if we have any questions.
No questions. I'll go ahead and launch poll number 3. I want to get these backwards here.
Oh, this is not our question we want yet.
I'm going to do this one. Sorry about that. Give me just a second here. There we go.
There we go.
Got them backwards. Sorry about that.
Stacy, would you like to read the question?
Sure. The question is, I have a student who wants advancement grant funding while they're still enrolled in high school. Is that possible? And we got 77% participation that time. And I think we can call that. And everybody got the correct answer, which is no. Students cannot access advancement grant funding while still enrolled in high school. It does require a high school credential, or I should clarify, to be separated from high school by 3 months or more. So there is the opportunity for students who did not complete high school to access an advancement grant if they are not associated with high school. So this is not if you're in a high school completion program, or not if you are in an adult diploma program, but if you have left school and then want to do training beyond that in the future, you do have the opportunity to access an advancement grant. All right, excellent.
Chris, did we have any other questions?
We did not.
Great. We're going to move on to VSAC assisted scholarships and forgivable loans. Many of you might be aware that VSAC administers more than 140 different scholarship programs in any given year. And so our booklet featuring all of those scholarships that we administer will be available online soon. And it's for students attending college in the 2026-27 school year. We expect it to be online soon, and we're expecting it in schools sometime in October. They are often sent to high school counseling offices. They are sent to colleges or universities. They are sometimes sent to agencies. You can request copies be sent to you through the publications part of our website or publications at vsac.org to send an email, but you can request copies of the scholarship booklet be sent if you have not already. Let's talk a little bit about VSAC assisted scholarships. Our VSAC assisted scholarships use one unified scholarship application, also called the USA. You'll see USA a lot, not United States of America. In this case, it's unified scholarship application. And it's more than 140 VSAC administered scholarships, as well as 10 forgivable loan programs for workforce development. The required documents don't have to be duplicated. So for instance, if you are applying for 5 scholarships and all of them require recommendation number 1 as a document, you only need to send one recommendation number 1. Now, there are some scholarships in our booklet that say they would like 2 recommendation number 1. So in that case, a student would send more than one because that particular scholarship asks for it. Students really need to read the eligibility requirements and meet the criteria to be considered for that scholarship listed. Students can upload documents electronically from MyVSAC and their scholarship area. The essay, the recommendations, they can see what required documents have gotten in, when they were received, what's still needed. And any scholarships that are based on financial need, VSAC will use the FAFSA information that came through for that student. So what that means is that the student needs their FAFSA to also be received by VSAC by the scholarship deadline. Let's talk about how students apply. So from that dashboard page where we saw work with grants before, there is a place for scholarships and forgivable loans. There is a paper application available, but let me say it takes more time to fill out. It relies on the U.S. Postal Service, and it has to be hand entered at VSAC. So it takes a substantial amount of more time than the student applying electronically. So let's talk about best practices, right? We don't want students to just meet deadlines. We want them to beat them. We anticipate that the scholarship deadline this year will be, I think it is February 11th of 2026. That is the Wednesday before any of our Vermont schools will be going on their February break. We do that on purpose. Students can check to see if everything's been received, but they also need to allow a day for documents to show up as uploaded. Things are uploaded to the cloud and then they get downloaded into the VSAC system overnight. So it takes a little time for that to show up. It's not instantaneous. For organization, it's students' responsibility to keep track of scholarships they applied for and the documents that are required by MyVSAC. However, that is something that's very easily viewed on their MyVSAC screen. We want to encourage students to allow time for transcripts and recommendations to be sent and for those recommendations to be well done, not the last minute. And if the high school knows, for instance, that the student will be applying, but they haven't applied yet, they can mail in documents such as the transcript as long as it's postmarked by that deadline, excuse me, of February 11th. This past year was February 12th. I need to keep checking. It's February 11th for 2026. What I also should mention is students cannot upload documents until their unified scholarship application is submitted. So really, it's important for students not to wait until the deadline day to file the application. They should file the application sooner, give themselves time to, ask and get things done in the proper way. So just wanted to mention that. Also, labels. We get a ton of documents for students here at VSAC, it's really important that they are labeled correctly. And so maybe if schools or agencies could communicate with staff about those requirements, or faculty, as well as the deadlines, that would be really important. We want students to follow instructions, so meeting the minimum word length, answering the questions asked. Really important in that essay. Some students will reuse their college admissions essay, while parts of the admissions essay may answer the questions we're asking. Sometimes it doesn't answer them at all. And so it might be an excellent essay, but if it doesn't answer the question, it may not help the student in this process. Recommendations have to be on letterhead or signed. So really important. High school students do not always know what a letterhead is, so important to share that with them. And also, scholarships are competitive. I don't have to say this to a lot of people. It really kind of goes without saying, but almost everyone who applies is eligible for the scholarship. And so we sometimes get calls here at VSAC from people who are irate that the student or themselves, they were not eligible for a particular scholarship when it was written directly for them. It described them to a T. Unfortunately, almost everyone who applied for that scholarship felt it applied to them to a T. So just some things to keep in mind. Stacy, would you like to talk a little bit about our workforce development funding that you access through scholarships?
Sure. So on that button, there was scholarships and forgivable loans. So the state has developed significant funding to address our workforce shortages. So there are multiple interest-free loans now that have been developed that can be forgiven after a single year or a single year equivalent of working in Vermont for each year that the loan was funded. These are applied for through that My VSAC portal. You can find the descriptions through the Unified Scholarship application. And currently, the programs include Vermont Trades, which covers many, many different programs and can cover up to the full tuition, up to a maximum currently of $23,000. The trades programs are non-degree, so not for associate's or bachelor's degrees, but can include certificate programs at colleges and programs that are not college related. Then there are nursing specific forgivable loans and nurse faculty loans, Vermont psychiatric, mental health nurse practitioner, dental hygiene, dentist, and then there is a National Guard tuition benefit program. So the ones with the asterisks are currently have been exhausted for the 25-26 year, but note that some of them don't have asterisks, and there is still funding available for those currently. These awards, when a student applies for these, they sign a promissory note agreeing that they understand that this is a loan, a 10-year interest-free loan for the value of their tuition up to that limit, and agree to repay it if they don't meet the workforce agreement of working in Vermont for 1 year. These are phenomenal. The students do not make payments on the loan while in school. They do not make payments for 1 year after receiving their credential. And then they complete forms to indicate their employer in Vermont, and the employer certifies the hours. Once the hours meet the equivalent of the 1 year of working in Vermont, the entire amount borrowed is forgiven as if it was a scholarship. It's amazing. We also wanted to mention there are additional funding sources potentially. These programs are not specific or unique to VSAC or Vermont in some cases, but they are potential funding resources for some degree programs, some non-degree programs, and some for both. There are registered apprenticeships and workforce development funding through Department of Labor. There are also program and provider funds. So Students should be thinking about applying for scholarships and grants through their institutions. They should also be thinking about whether their trade school or the program they're applying to has any funding that they should be asking for. If they are working, they should be checking to see if their employer offers any contributions towards tuition payment that they can access. If there's a connection to military service within the family or for the student, they should check with the Veterans Administration for funding. There's a phenomenal agency within Vermont called Higher Ability Vermont, who works with Vermonters who identify as having any physical, mental, emotional, or learning disability that can impact their ability to access employment, and they can work with students to help support their education and training goals to reach that, which can help with additional funding. There are scholarships in so many places in addition to the VSAC scholarships. And we wanted to make sure we mention these because while VSAC is a phenomenal resource of funding, and we want everyone to be sure that this is a primary place to turn to, there are additional resources, and we want you to reach out, and we can always reconnect you to these resources. These are our partners. Okay, let's see what we know about scholarships.
I'd love to propose maybe we hold off on the remaining polls just for the sake of time, but we have had a question come in. Going back to the trades and the workforce development funding, the question is, can you provide a list of Vermont trades that will apply for the workforce development funding?
I cannot. However, it's basically any program that leads to a high-paying or in-demand job in Vermont. And the Department of Labor has indicated it's easier for them to tell us what is not in demand than what is in demand, because we are in desperate need of workers in many areas in Vermont. So there are very few jobs and careers in Vermont that do not need workers. So basically, if it is not an associate's or bachelor's degree and it leads to a credential or certificate of value, it's probably trades eligible, and you could certainly reach out to us to find out.
Thank you. We have a couple more, if I may. Would a student going back to school for a different degree qualify for a forgivable loan? Or is it only for students who are looking to receive that first degree for the first time? In case it matters, this question is specific to the dental hygiene program.
Having a prior bachelor's degree does not preclude you from using a forgivable loan. But for that one particular, the dental hygiene, that's applicable for trades. It wouldn't be for another degree. It would be for a certificate or non-degree program. But for dental hygiene, yes, they could have a bachelor's, yes.
Thank you. And the last question for now is, how are students notified when VSAC pulls back previously awarded grants?
Pulls back previously awarded grants?
That's how it's worded, yeah. I'm wondering if maybe that means a change to a grant award, perhaps? I'm only speculating here.
Yeah, all communication first happens through the MyVSAC portal. So typically it would be a notification within the MyVSAC award amount. And then via email, there's a corresponding your award amount has changed or something similar that comes through the email when a change is made. If that is, if it says pulled back, I would suspect that means that the income information provided was revised, which can happen if people estimate their income, and then the tax information that was provided showed that their estimate was a bit under of what they actually made, that they thought they were going to, for example, thought they were only going to make 30,000, but it turned out they made 45, their grant may have been too much, and so had to be returned.
Thank you. No remaining questions.
And certainly for that question, I would add certainly worth a call to VSAC, specifically to our grant department, to maybe talk to someone about what happened. So if the student looks at my VSAC, there's a change, they don't understand why, they can certainly reach out to grants and they will be glad to speak with that person.
Yes, definitely. And if there are extenuating circumstances, also to do further potential work.
I do realize that we are running out of time, and I appreciate your patience with us. So let's just talk for a minute about federal student loans. They require the FAFSA. The college determines the eligibility, and only undergraduates are eligible for subsidized loans, which are loans where the government is paying the interest while the student's in school. Unsubsidized loans, the student's responsible for that interest. They don't have to repay it while they're in school, but that interest is growing. So that's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized. Subsidized is based on the student's financial need, and the maximums depend on the year in college. The first year that a student takes out a loan, they do have to fill out some information online, including a master promissory note and doing entrance counseling. And the post-secondary institution, college or trade school, will tell the student what they need to do and how they need to do it. Want to mention cumulative borrowing in federal student loans. So there are maximums based on each year the student is in school, and there is a difference in borrowing for independent students. Just want to mention that the maximum undergraduate dependent student can borrow is $31,500, or I'm sorry, $31,000. And so if they need more time than 4 years of college, they may be running out of federal student loan eligibility. The Federal Direct Plus loan is something that's available for parents of dependent undergrads, as well as for graduate or professional students to help pay for college or career school. Again, these are Title IV eligible institutions, so the schools are eligible to use federal student aid. They're commonly called Plus for the parents and Grad Plus for graduate students. The maximum Parent Plus loan for the current school year is the cost of attendance minus aid offered, but an update is coming for the 2026-2027 school year. So important to hear about that. There's a credit check, but they don't do credit scores or things like that. The credit check is really, do you have a good repayment history? And some colleges will list a plus loan on their financial aid notifications. That does not mean that the college or university or trade school thinks the parent can afford a plus loan. It's just the cost of school minus the financial aid offered. And sometimes that's confusing for students because they think they're all set. Their needs have been met. But that's a plus loan and a loan the parent would have to take out. Want to talk about interest rates. Every year in the spring, late spring, interest rates reset. And it's a fixed rate for the school year. So a student will have possibly 8 separate loans. They're subsidized, unsubsidized, each year of college, and they will have 4 different interest rates, probably. There's also an origination fee on those loans. So that means that $5,500 for a freshman is not actually what gets paid. It is more like $5,400 and $5,442, I think, is the number that I'm thinking of. So it's not the whole amount because a fee is withheld. There are non-federal loans available for students who need education beyond what a federal loan can offer. VSAC is a lender, and we do have a resource. The My Education Loans resource is not necessarily about VSAC loans, but it is about what sorts of things you need to consider when you are looking for a loan. And then there's some things to consider for families with non-federal loans. Those are all in that guide. So it is an excellent resource. and I realize that we have hit our 11 o'clock time frame. We have just a few slides left, and they are simply resources. Stacy, would you like to just move quickly through these?
Sure, absolutely. So primary resource, the Financial Aid Toolkit is an outstanding area where you can get federal aid news and updates, all kinds of college planning and federal financial aid resources, links to tools and resources, as well as outreach and social media ideas if you want links from your high school or college page to links to things such as the FAFSA. All right,
And
our own resource.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Our own resources, we would encourage vsac.org/edpronews for our educational professionals to connect to information for our counselors, and then vsac.org/financial-aid-resources for all of the information in more detail that we talked about today. Part 2, super important, the updates. What's going to be different? What's going to be new? More information about what's happening at the federal level, and then some updates on state and VSAC initiatives. This will happen Monday, October 6th from 9:30 to 11:30, and you can register at vsac.org events. As Carrie mentioned, some changes coming to loan programs, as well as many other changes. And here's our contact info.
And I realized that we needed to rush toward the end, and we did not offer an opportunity for questions for our last few slides. So if you need to reach out to us, our email addresses and phone numbers are there. And we once again want to thank you for sticking with us, for joining us, and we hope that you have a wonderful beginning of this new school year.